Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the American Association for Cancer Research, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Marge Fody, and I have the great honor of serving as the Chief Executive Officer of the AACR. For those of you who do not know about the AACR, we are the world's first and largest professional organization dedicated to advancing cancer research and to advancing its mission of preventing and curing all cancers. Over the years, the AACR and its more than 42,000 members in the United States and 119 countries around the world have been at the forefront of every major breakthrough against cancer. We marshal the full spectrum of expertise in cancer research, which really ranges from identifying the top scientific priorities in all fields of cancer research to convene conferences and educational workshops all over the world, publish 8 high-impact peer-reviewed journals in the field, and we're about to give birth to another one next year in blood cancer research. We publish not only that, but we also publish a magazine for cancer survivors and caregivers and all patients. And we work to raise funds from the philanthropic community for meritorious cancer research. In particular, relevant to why we're here today, AACR also actively communicates with legislators, other policymakers, and the public about the enormous value of cancer research and the related sciences, which are increasing in numbers. For example, engineering, physics, bioinformatics, and the serious need for increasing funding to save more lives from cancer. And that is why we're here today at this special hearing on Capitol Hill. A cornerstone of the AACR's communications to Congress and the public is our annual Cancer Progress Report, of which we're very proud. And we're extraordinarily proud to share that with you today to inform you that this is the 9th edition of this important publication. I'd like to take just a few moments to recognize the AACR's president, Dr. Elaine Mardis, who sits to my right here, for her leadership in the role of in the development of this report, the Cancer Progress Report Steering Committee, and everyone on our staff who has been involved in working over an entire year to develop this important publication. Special recognition goes to Dr. Raj Sengupta, who's in the audience here today, who functions as the senior scientific editor for the Cancer Progress Report, to lead science writer Dr. Karen Honey, and to John Retzloff, whom many of you know, who is the Chief Policy Officer here in DC, and his entire staff for their assistance in bringing a special call to action to our policy makers that emphasizes the vital importance of cancer research in driving progress against cancer. Before we showcase the report with a video highlighting some of the key points contained in it, I also want to thank Congresswoman Jackie Speer for securing this beautiful room for our event, and for her outspoken advocacy and strong support for medical research and funding for the National Institutes of Health. Now, please turn your attention to the screen to watch this very impressive video.
The progress from basic research in the application of technology into the clinical translation for cancer patients has been astounding.
I had just found out that this cancer was in my lungs and my liver and my kidneys. And then 2 hours later, I find out I have 3 or 4 weeks left to live.
The breast cancer had metastasized to at least 2 other parts of the body. I really thought this is a death sentence.
I quickly regrew tumors after that. That was really, really bad news. The average for metastasized bladder cancer is about 14 months.
We're beginning to recognize the ways that we can interpret genomic data to indicate just exactly what drugs to use.
After all the radiation and chemo were done, I took a targeted therapy drug until August. 9 months later, and he said to me, what was there is essentially gone.
My oncologist said there is a clinical trial for people with triple-negative breast cancer. Immunotherapy plus chemotherapy once a week for the last 4 years. Now, 4 years sounds like a long time, but when I was diagnosed with the second cancer, they thought I would live 18 months.
She said, I did notice one pathology report that noted some genetic issues. Would you consider taking part in a clinical trial? Well, yes, of course I would. There were tumors that I could feel with my fingers. After 4 days, I couldn't feel those tumors anymore.
We've had such tremendous success with it. We started it July 6th, and we went back a month later for her first round of imaging, and the tumors were cut by half.
The clinical trial at NIH was great. That put me in a complete and full remission for the first time since my original treatment.
I've been taking erdafitinib since I started the trial in 2016, and the tumor has not grown.
She had this new solution that had just been approved by the FDA. And here I am, but you can't see it. It's like a miracle.
I started a new drug, a daily oral medicine. My scans show no progression. If you can have that, what more can you ask for?
There are numerous clinical trials now that functionalize mutations in ways that has never been done before.
Now they have so many new mutation tests, and they're being treated by targeted therapy drugs. A lot of patients don't have to have chemo or radiation at all. When people meet me and they know I am a 12-year survivor, it gives them an idea that maybe they can survive this as well.
I would preach to others to reach out for any opportunity they have to get prehab. Take the opportunity to improve your health before you have your surgery or your treatment so that you can be stronger to recover.
I'm great now. Getting that complete remission really makes you stop and think and appreciate every day you get.
To me, cancer research was important because it offered me a clinical trial that saved my life. And now what I'm seeing is cancer research is moving on and providing other people like me the opportunity to survive.
Every one of us knows someone that has cancer. The only way that we're going to find the answers is through funding the research.
Federal funding is critically important. We continue to find new and better ways to study cancer and new and better ways to interpret those data into therapeutic answers for patients. We can really drive the fight against cancer forward.
My belief is that Congress can spend enough money when it comes to cancer research. And these type of programs need to be more accessible to more people. That funding is one of the most surefire ways of getting there.
Cancer research is one of the most important things that you could put your money behind. So do that. This is about hope. It's hope for people who didn't think they had a chance, and now they have a chance.
I want to thank all those who participated in the video. The cancer survivors were spectacular, and I just want to add a personal note before I continue that my sister is a 22-year late-stage ovarian cancer survivor, and this was even before all of the amazing research that's been done over the past 22 years, and so there's enormous hope and wonder in what's happening today in cancer research. So as you've just seen in the video, the 12 months covered during this report have been really exceptional. The rapid pace and broad scope of the progress we're making against cancer are extraordinary. And in the past year, cancer research has delivered a record number of scientific advances to cancer patients in the form of new treatments for their diseases. Many of these new treatments are strengthening the two newest pillars of cancer care, molecularly targeted therapy and immunotherapy. The remarkable advances in cancer science and medicine that will be discussed today would not have been possible without the generous funding for the National Institutes of Health and the National Cancer Institute. This funding is truly the lifeblood of today's medical research. The progress that is bringing hope to patients also depends on consistent and significant funding for the Food and Drug Administration and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Just as importantly, efforts to expedite the delivery of new therapies to the clinic are dependent on the involvement of the cancer patients and survivors in medical research, including their willingness to participate in clinical trials like my sister participated in a phase 1 trial many years ago, share their health information, and advocate alongside the AACR for increased funding for cancer research and effective policy changes to maximize future advances against this complex disease. As you know, there are 200 different cancers. The AACR is especially grateful to those individuals and their loved ones who have generously shared their experiences with cancer in this year's Cancer Progress Report. Their personal stories really put a face on the challenges and the triumphs experienced every day by cancer survivors throughout this country and indeed the world. There are 17 million cancer survivors in this country alone, actually. 3 of the cancer survivors featured in the report are on our panel this afternoon. Thank you for being here. Keith Taggart, Eva Joseph, and Tama Hargraves, and we look forward to hearing from them in a few moments. I also would like to recognize other individuals and their loved ones who are featured in the report and who are with us in the audience today. Christine Cosby and her husband, Robert Elliott, Kirby Lewis and his wife, Marianne, Randy Surratt and his wife, Vicki, Keith's husband, Greg Stipp, and Eva's husband, Dwight Joseph. We love these loyal spouses. I also would like to acknowledge and thank Senator Richard Shelby and Congressman Donald Mckeon, both of whom shared their unique perspectives on cancer in this year's report. And yes, you know, members of Congress are also diagnosed with this disease. Unfortunately, neither Senator Shelby nor Congressman Mckeon were able to be here with us today, but we're delighted that Congressman Mckeon's legislative assistant, Justin Goldberger, will say a few words on his behalf in a few moments. Lastly, I want to take a moment to tell you about the amazing young woman, Emma Levine, whom you saw in the video. She is featured in the report because she received a groundbreaking new molecularly targeted therapeutic. Researchers identified the genetic alteration driving Emma's cancer, known as an NTRK fusion, and matched her with a therapeutic designed to inhibit this protein. Although Emma did not respond to this initial targeted therapy, possibly due to programs with it crossing the blood-brain barrier, which is an issue that researchers have been working on over the years. She is now receiving a recently approved second NTRK inhibitor that has improved penetration into the central nervous system. Emma's story highlights the reality that there is a vital need for multiple drug development efforts aimed at the same cancer-causing proteins in order to fully benefit more patients and those with shared drivers at different locations in the body. Fortunately, the dedicated members of the cancer research community have now the scientific knowledge, cutting-edge technologies, and passion to deliver unprecedented progress for these cancer patients. We're also very, very grateful for the bipartisan leadership in Congress that has delivered 4 consecutive years of steady, significant annual funding increases for the NIH, which will help us to rapidly exploit these extraordinary opportunities. We especially thank Senator Shelby, Senator Blunt, Senator Murray, Congresswoman Lowy, Congresswoman DeLauro, Congressman Cole, and their colleagues for their extraordinary bipartisan efforts on behalf of all Americans who are touched by cancer, either directly or indirectly. Thanks to their shared vision and commitment to appropriations for medical research, the NIH budget has grown by $9 million, or 30% since fiscal year 2015. And now, a big announcement. Thanks to the House passage earlier this year of the annual spending bill that funds the NIH, as well as this morning's announcement by Senate Appropriations Subcommittee Chairman Roy Blunt, that he is recommending a $3 billion funding increase for NIH in fiscal 2020. Another significant funding increase for NIH is within reach. Congratulations and thanks to members of Congress for doing that. Clearly, by providing generous funding, Congress will help us markedly improve cancer care, increase survivorship, spur economic growth, and maintain the United States position as the global leader in science and medical research. The AACR is committed to working with Congress on an ongoing basis and all other stakeholders dedicated to markedly reducing cancer incidence, morbidity, and mortality. We are working together, and by doing so, we can accelerate our progress against cancer and take major strides toward the goal of preventing and curing all cancers at the earliest possible time. And now, it is my great honor to introduce the esteemed president of the AACR, Dr. Elaine Mardis. Dr. Mardis holds many hats, of course, and she's very capable of having all these positions at the same time. She holds a nationwide foundation endowed chair in genomic medicine, is co-executive director of the Institute for Genomic Medicine at Nationwide Children's Hospital in Columbus, Ohio, and is professor of pediatrics at The Ohio State University School of Medicine. She is a world-renowned researcher whose work centers on the genomic characterization of cancer, which is a very hot area, and its exciting implications for precision oncology. She has presented keynote addresses and other invited talks at international conferences around the world on cancer genomics, next-generation sequencing technology, personalized medicine, and cancer immunogenomics. She has won numerous awards during her career, much of which was spent as a key leader in the Human Genome Project at Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis. Dr. Mardis' expertise and vision have been absolutely invaluable to advancing the scientific programs of the AACR, and today I want to again acknowledge her leadership as chair of this year's Cancer Progress Report and the steering committee. So please welcome Dr. Mardis to the podium.
Well, thanks so much, Marge, for that great introduction, and really want to say good afternoon to everyone who's here today, and to thank you for joining us at this important event. I'm really delighted to be here to discuss the AACR Cancer Progress Report 2019, in particular because I had so much involvement with it. This is a really remarkable document. It is every year, but I guess I feel a little special ownership this year. It really is detailing for everyone in beautiful pictures, graphics, and data, you know, the aspects of medical research that are funded by federal investments in the National Institutes of Health, and how this is really powering unparalleled progress against the collection of devastating diseases we know as cancer. This progress is illustrated by the fact that the number of cancer survivors living in the United States has now reached a record high of nearly 16.9, it just went up. 16.9 million cancer survivors here in the United States. And in addition, the overall U.S. cancer death rate fell by 27% between the years of 1991 and 2016, which is the most recent date for which we have these data. And that equates, importantly, to 2.6 million lives that have been saved by the progress brought about by medical research. Another way to measure progress against cancer is to consider the number of anti-cancer therapeutics that are approved in the United States by the Food and Drug Administration over a defined period of time. And by this measure, this 12-month period that's covered in our 2019 Cancer Progress Report was the most successful reported in the 9 editions so far of this report. During this period, the FDA approved 17 new therapeutics for treating patients with various types of cancer, and it expanded the uses of 10 previously approved therapeutics to include the treatment of additional types of cancer. So that's really remarkable progress. And the development of these new cancer treatments and other medical products that are used in cancer care in particular has been made possible because of the tireless work of individuals across the spectrum of cancer research, from basic and translational to clinical research. All are equally important in fueling the virtuous cycle from bedside to bench and bedside back again. In my remarks today, I'm going to highlight how innovative cancer science lays the foundation for progress against cancer by discussing how cancer genomics has fueled advances in the development of novel cancer therapeutics. I'm going to touch on the new wave of technologies that are paving the way for the next breakthroughs in cancer science and medicine, and before closing, I'll point out some of the ongoing challenges we're still facing. Over the past decade, work that I've been involved in with many, many others in cancer genomics research, including ambitious, large-scale, federally funded programs like the Cancer Genome Atlas, have fueled a revolution in our understanding of cancer as a disease of the genome. These large-scale efforts have comprehensively cataloged the breadth of genetic alterations that are the main drivers of cancer initiation and progression. These discovery efforts have been coincident with the development of molecularly targeted therapies that address cancer's genetic vulnerabilities and have heralded this new era that we're now celebrating in precision medicine that links together the genomic profile of a patient with a specific drug that addresses those genomic vulnerabilities. Because cancer genomics research and other fields of basic research are continuing to expand our understanding of cancer, we are developing molecularly targeted therapies at an extraordinarily rapid pace. And this progress, as I mentioned, is being highlighted by the 27 different therapeutics that are approved in the past year by the FDA and have benefited many of the patients that are on the panel today as well, and we'll hear more about that in a moment. The approval of one such therapy, larotrectinib, represents a milestone in precision medicine because it was the first molecularly targeted therapeutic that was approved by the FDA to treat adult or pediatric cancers with any type of cancer, regardless of its origin in the body, as so long as it carries this very specific genetic error that's called an NTRK fusion. Taggart is one of the adults who is benefiting from larotrectinib, and you're going to hear a little bit from him later in the program. And in the past few weeks, a second therapeutic was also approved by the FDA for treating patients with any cancer that tests positive for these NTRK gene fusions. And this also highlights that this progress against cancer continues, and I think this is incredibly exciting for researchers, patients, and everyone, families as well. In the same way that cancer genomics research has driven the emergence of these molecularly targeted therapies, scientific discoveries in the field of cancer immunology, the interaction of our immune system with cancers, have led to an exciting new pillar of cancer treatment that's called immunotherapy. And over the past decade, the use of immunotherapy has revolutionized the treatment of an increasingly broad array of cancer types, starting with melanoma and now branching out into many other types of the disease. This has most recently included a particularly intractable form of breast cancer called triple-negative breast cancer. And as you'll hear from Eva Joseph, who's also here on our panel and participated in this clinical trial, this is an incredibly important development for this now very, at this point in time, or prior to the FDA approval, a very intractable and hard to treat type of breast cancer. So I'll just finalize my comments here by saying that the newest cancer clinical trials now are combining molecular targeted therapies with immunotherapies. And these vulnerabilities for both the molecular target as well as the immunotherapy can be identified, again, using this data about the genomics for each individual's cancer. Researchers are also looking to harness advances in genomic technology, not only to accelerate the pace of basic research like I've described, but also to improve patient care. And I want to just spend a few minutes telling you about liquid biopsy as one type of this technology application that's being studied for use in many different ways in the clinic. For example, it is used in the highly sensitive monitoring of patients' responses to therapy. So we have less invasive, informative, and highly sensitive ways of evaluating patients as they're being treated in specific ways. If you haven't heard the term liquid biopsy before, I'll define it for you. It basically refers to the collection and analysis of fluids from our bodies, such as blood, cerebral spinal fluid, or urine. One example of a potential use for liquid biopsies from my own research in pediatric brain cancers is that we are now investigating the use of cerebral spinal fluid as a way to track patients' responses to therapy, especially in the setting of highly aggressive pediatric brain cancer. And we think this will give us new clues to how they're responding to their treatments. The early detection of cancer, we also know, is another vitally important area in which this technology around liquid biopsy is being investigated and could have a very major impact, because the earlier a cancer is detected, the more likely it is that it can be treated successfully. There are still many questions to be answered about this approach and barriers to overcome if we're going to realize the potential use of liquid biopsies in early detection. But this new research area holds enormous promise for increasing progress and for cancer cures. Even though we've made many advances against cancer, much more work needs to be done. For example, it's estimated that more than 4 out of 10 cancer cases diagnosed in the United States in adults age 30 and older are attributable to potentially preventable causes. These include smoking, obesity, and alcohol use. In this regard, I would like to focus on the rapidly increasing popularity of novel tobacco products referred to as e-cigarettes, particularly among youth in the U.S. and young adults. And this is posing a very new and pressing public health challenge. E-cigarettes can deliver very high levels of nicotine, a highly addictive substance, and they expose users to numerous potentially toxic chemicals and increase the risk of youth and young adults going on to use combustible cigarette products. Despite legislative and regulatory efforts to curb youth access to e-cigarettes, the 2019 National Youth Tobacco Survey showed a continued and worrying increase in the number of youth using e-cigarettes. About 28% of high school students used e-cigarettes, up from 21% in 2018, and 2/3 of those students used flavored e-cigarettes. That is why the AACR issued a press release today applauding the recent announcement from the administration to clear the market of flavored e-cigarettes until manufacturers submit a tobacco product application to the FDA. The ongoing outbreak of severe lung disease and deaths among adult and youth users of e-cigarettes underscores the need for additional research and regulation for these novel products. In conclusion, as the Cancer Progress 2019 report shows, medical research has and will continue to spur progress against cancer. If we seize the opportunities to drive research forward, we will stimulate more breakthroughs that will save more lives and lead to improved survivorship. To ensure that we can do this, we need to continue to prioritize medical research as a nation. A major goal of the Cancer Progress Report is to serve as a call to action to Congress and the administration, as well as the public, to continue to make funding for medical research through the NIH a national priority. With sufficient resources, we can accelerate the pace at which we develop new strategies to prevent, detect, diagnose, and treat cancer and expedite our quest to conquer this disease. In this way, we will bring hope to patients and their loved ones everywhere. Thank you for your attention to these remarks. Now, as Marge mentioned earlier, we are very grateful to Congressman Donald Mckeon for sharing his perspectives on cancer in our 2019 AACR Cancer Progress Report. I know that he was disappointed not to be able to be here today. However, it is my pleasure to introduce Congressman Mckeon's legislative assistant, Justin Goldberger, who will say a few words on his behalf. Thank you, Justin.
Hi there, how are you today? Thank you so much for having me. I wish my boss could be here, but when Brandon reached out and asked me to give a few remarks, I was very excited to do so. For those of you who don't know, my boss is Donald Mckeon. He represents Virginia 4, which is Richmond, Virginia, and Southside, and he is a colorectal cancer survivor. In 2014, he was diagnosed after he went in for routine checkup, and they found a tumor that was minor, so he caught it pretty early on, thankfully, and ever since he's been an advocate for preventative medicine and early colonoscopies. So obviously you're focused on cancer and oncology research here, but I wanted to talk a little bit about what my boss and Congress has been doing in not only the research sphere, but the larger access and cost spheres together. We unequivocally know that cancer research and NIH and NCI research are the most important leg of the stool for finding a cure. But also that comes with that is making sure that constituents can afford it and they also can access it, it's accessible to them. A little stat we like to throw on the office, between 2010 and 2016, every single one of the new drugs approved by the FDA, 210 exactly, at some point NIH funding underlied that research that approved, that went into that drug. So in our office at least, we are giddy to see hopefully $3 billion, maybe $2 billion increase NIH funding, keeping our fingers crossed, but we'll do whatever it takes to hopefully get that across the line. To that extent as well, we also have been doing a lot of work in the access arena. Like I said before, my boss is a colorectal cancer survivor, and it's actually a higher statistic chance of colorectal cancer within African American men than any other demographic. With that being said, we're raising the awareness in trying to make sure that those communities know to get screened early and often. And we're also working on a bill with Mr. Payne's office, whose father was a colorectal cancer advocate as well. It's called the Removing Barriers to Colorectal Cancer Act. We are up to 310 co-sponsors as of yesterday, so we have hit the threshold for 290 and to come under suspension, which is exciting. But the bill basically would remove a financial barrier in that currently if you're on Medicare and you go in for a screening and a general practitioner finds polyps or cancerous tissue and removes said tissue in the same colonoscopy, that colonoscopy becomes rather than preventative, diagnostic, and the patient can be billed up to $350 for a copay, or co-insurance, pardon me. So obviously a huge burden on that person if they wake up and then have a surprise bill. So this bill would basically do away with that and make it free, so the patient would hopefully be able to go in without the fear of being charged afterwards. So we'll have to keep you posted on that, and we're hopefully getting it across the line. I think we have 60 in the Senate as well, co-sponsors. So hopefully that'll get across the line and on the president's desk. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is costs. Obviously, these new breakthrough technologies, immunotherapy, even small molecule drugs that are oncology related are important, but if they are too costly for constituents to afford, they do us no good. A few things we've been doing on ENC, Energy and Commerce Committee. We have worked to pass the CREATES Act, bipartisan, which would basically allow generic companies samples of branded drugs, so it makes it easier for them to produce said drugs in a generic format and hopefully a more affordable format. We have passed pay for delay legislation, where a lot of the branded pharmaceutical companies will settle with generic companies to make sure they stay out of the marketplace for a certain number of years. And also passed REMS abuse legislation, all in the Energy and Commerce Committee, hoping it comes to a floor soon, and remaining optimistic since it is bipartisan. Lastly, I just want to say thank you for your all's advocacy. Without you all coming to our offices and emphasizing the importance of NIH and NCI research, we would not be able to do our jobs. So please keep it up, and I want to say thank you again for having me here, and hopefully if you do this next year, my boss can be here. But thank you again, and looking forward to working with you all.
Okay, thanks so much, Justin, for your commitment and your enthusiasm in this important area. It's now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Terry King. Terry is the Associate Chair for Multidisciplinary Oncology in the Department of Surgery and the Chief of the Division of Breast Surgery at the Dana-Farber Brigham and Women's Cancer Center. She's also the Ann E. Dyson Associate Professor of Surgery in the field of women's cancers at Harvard Medical School. Dr. King's service spans clinical, research, and educational activities. I've known her for many years now, as we've both worked actively in breast cancer research. She maintains an active clinical practice dedicated to the diagnosis and surgical treatment of breast cancer. She also conducts research on the molecular genetics of lobular carcinoma in situ, which has been supported by numerous funding awards. And through the Translational Breast Cancer Research Consortium, she has successfully initiated and completed accrual to a multi-institutional trial aimed at understanding the role of surgery in stage 4 breast cancer. Terry directs the efforts of the Breast Cancer Personalized Risk Assessment, Education, and Prevention Program at the Brigham and Women's. She's a member of my Cancer Progress Report 2019 Steering Committee, and she has served many ways for the AACR on the Surgical Oncology Task Force, the Exhibits Committee, and the Science Education and Career Advancement Committee. So she's a dedicated member of the AACR, and it's a pleasure to welcome Dr. King to lend her expertise to today's briefing.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mardis, for the nice introduction. I want to thank Dr. Foti and the AACR staff for inviting me to join you all here today. It's really a privilege to be here. So, as you've heard from Dr. Mardis and others, the sequencing of the human genome has really resulted in exponential advances in our understanding of how certain types of genetic changes or alterations lead to cancer development. Now, when these genetic changes are inherited or passed through the bloodline in a family, we call these germline changes. And over the last decade, the pace of discovery of germline or inherited genetic changes that can lead to the development of cancer has moved so fast that we now find ourselves with information that we're not quite sure how to use to effectively counsel patients and their families about their risk of cancer. For the most well-known genetic changes that lead to cancer, we understand the benefits of prophylactic or risk-reducing surgery. For example, removal of the breast or ovaries before cancer develops for individuals with known cancer-causing BRCA or BRCA mutations. But for the large number of these newly identified germline changes that can lead to cancer, there is still much more work to be done to fully understand how often cancer will develop and what is the role of risk-reducing surgery to prevent cancer in these patients, and when, at what age should these life-altering operations be performed. With increased awareness and availability of genetic testing, men and women can simply order a saliva kit online and get their genetic testing results in the mail. This highlights the need to fund research that helps us help our patients navigate these sometimes very challenging situations. Our understanding of non-inherited risk for cancer has also exploded. Things or behaviors that we have control over, these are non-inherited risk factors. And it's now estimated, as you heard from Dr. Mardis, that about 40% of cases of cancer in the United States are actually attributable to preventable causes. The major preventable causes of cancer, of course, include tobacco use, obesity, lack of physical activity, alcohol consumption, exposure to UV light from the sun or tanning beds, and failure to use interventions that treat or prevent infection with cancer-associated pathogens, such as cancer-causing strains of the human papillomavirus. So not using tobacco is the single best way a person can prevent cancer from developing. Many cases of skin cancer can be prevented by protecting the skin from the ultraviolet radiation of the sun or not using tanning beds, and nearly all cases of cervical cancer could be prevented by HPV vaccination. But 49% of US adolescents have not received the proper doses of these vaccines. So these things sound simple, do this or don't do that. But the more challenging problem is the link now between obesity and cancer. We've all seen the statistics on the increasing rates of obesity among children and adults in the United States, and obesity alone is associated with 15 types of cancer. Research shows that about 1/5 of all cancer diagnoses in the United States can be attributable to being overweight or obese, being physically inactive, eating poorly, or drinking excessively. Now, we all know these are hard behaviors to change, but they can be addressed with well-designed clinical trials that empower men and women to take control of their behaviors. And research funding directed towards these behavioral sciences is just as critical as research funding for new drugs and targeted therapies. As a surgeon who cares for men and women with breast cancer, there are 3 things that I want my patients to hear when they walk in the room to see me. Number 1, thanks to research, we know how to treat their cancer. Number 2, we're going to work with them to define the best treatment strategy for their particular type of cancer. And number 3, and most importantly, a cancer diagnosis is not their fault. Now, yes, we are learning more and more about behavior and lifestyle choices that are linked to cancer, but cancer is complicated. And I see women and sometimes men every week who say to me, but I did everything right, and I still got cancer. Funding for research that allows us to continue to develop and implement more effective strategies for cancer prevention, early detection, and treatment is critical. At the same time, we also need to support research that aims to understand and address the needs of the rapidly expanding population of cancer survivors. I suspect everyone in this room knows someone whose life has been touched by cancer. The increasing number of survivors is a testament to the significant progress we are making against the disease. Yet despite this progress, cancer survivors are often faced with serious and persistent adverse outcomes, including physical, emotional, and psychosocial changes related to their disease and treatment. Each person diagnosed with cancer faces a unique set of challenges. Only about 1 in 4 survivors reports poor physical quality of life, and 1 in 10 survivors reports poor mental health quality-related life. Utilization of palliative care, adopting a healthy lifestyle, and participating in cancer prehab and rehab programs like the ones in which Christine Colby took part in can improve quality of life and give patients back some sense of control over their life and their cancer journey. Understanding the impact of these programs requires rigorous study design and validated methodologies, but that is only the first step. We then have to determine the optimal way to implement these results across a variety of clinical settings and geographic regions to be sure that all cancer patients, whether they're being cared for at major academic centers or at community hospitals, can benefit from the results of these programs. So-called implementation science is a field in its infancy, but it's becoming more and more exciting as we now live in a world connected by digital health, where technology can be leveraged to bring the results of this type of research, the impact of prehab and rehabilitation programs to all corners of the world for all patients with cancer. Every single cancer patient in this room can attest that having a cancer diagnosis is a journey. Sometimes the road seems smooth and the options seem clear, and other times it feels as if there's a roadblock at every turn. Our ability to help patients make choices both when these choices seem easy and when they seem hard is the result of research. In my field, federally funded research allows us to confidently guide patients through the surgical decision-making process. I counsel women that bigger surgery is not always better surgery. In the 1990s, we used to remove all of the lymph nodes underneath a woman's arm to determine if the breast cancer had spread to the nodes. By 2003, most surgeons in the United States had adopted a new technique called sentinel lymph node biopsy, where we only have to remove the first nodes that drain the breast to determine if the cancer has spread, and only if we find cancer in those first nodes do we have to remove additional nodes. Well, by 2010, we learned that even if the cancer had spread to 1 or 2 of those first nodes, we still did not need to remove the remainder of the lymph nodes under the woman's arm, thereby sparing thousands of women and men the morbidity of axillary lymph node surgery. These advances fall under the theme of less is more. High-quality research helps us to learn when we can dial back treatment, including surgery, and when we need to add more treatment. Eva Joseph took this journey, initially diagnosed in 2002 with what we now call triple-negative breast cancer. Yet in 2002, we didn't have that name. Our understanding of the molecular subtypes of breast cancer was just beginning. She completed all of the treatment her physicians recommended, surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation. And when she and her doctors were least expecting it, 12 years later, in 2014, her cancer returned. The good news is that during those 12 years, through research, we learned a lot about triple-negative breast cancer. Eva joined a clinical trial, as you heard, evaluating a new drug, a type of immunotherapy, atezolizumab, which works by helping Eva's own immune system recognize the cancer cells as foreign and kill them just as your immune system helps you fight an infection. Over the last 5 years, immunotherapy options have had a significant impact in melanoma and certain lung cancers, significantly improving survival in patients who previously had very few choices. And over the past year, we saw the first FDA approval of immunotherapy in triple-negative breast cancer. It's thanks to patients like Eva Joseph, other patients on our panel, willing to enroll in these studies to help us move the field forward. And yes, male breast cancer is a real thing, and we are just beginning to develop the resources and tools that we need to understand how it may be different than female breast cancer, so we can develop more effective strategies for those men. And thank you, Kirby Lewis, for sharing your story. The excitement around combinations of immunotherapy and chemotherapy in breast cancer have now even moved into the preoperative setting, where researchers are asking the question, what if we help the immune system recognize the tumor when it first develops, before a patient has surgery? Will this allow the immune system to better protect women and men from their cancer returning? The trajectory of a cancer journey is variable. For some, it begins with treatment, moves into follow-up, and then on to survivorship. Whereas for others, the trajectory becomes a life with cancer as a chronic disease. We need to identify the optimal way to support coordinated cancer care for all patients, wherever their trajectory is, and to ensure that our new treatment strategies benefit patients by both improving cancer-related outcomes as well as maintaining their overall quality of life. This requires a concerted effort from all stakeholders, our clinical team members, our research team members, and the voice of our patients. Toma Hargraves mentioned that she was impressed that her oncologist brought her entire care team into the room at her first visit, and everyone had a role in Toma's cancer treatment. Cancer treatment is complicated, often involving surgeons, medical oncologists, and radiation oncologists. And ensuring that care is coordinated and that patients feel supported is critical to improving cancer-related outcomes and quality of life. Now Toma participates as a lay navigator and important team member for other patients facing their own cancer diagnosis. It is truly a privilege for me to be here today for this unveiling of the annual AACR Cancer Progress Report. As you've heard, this report is a cornerstone of the AACR's educational and advocacy efforts, highlighting how research continues to extend and improve lives. The message reflected through the many personal stories, which you'll hear more about today, underscores how unwavering bipartisan support from Congress in the form of robust and sustained annual increases in funding for the NIH, the NCI, and the FDA is vital if we are to accelerate the pace of progress against cancer for the benefit of patients and their families everywhere. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Dr. King. We're going to now move to our panel of cancer survivors here. I just want to give a brief introduction to each one, and then we'll hear from them. So sitting right next to Dr. King is Keith Taggart. Keith lives in Oklahoma City with his husband, Greg. He is a real estate broker and manages a real estate sales office with about 60 agents. He is also an attorney and does legal work. After learning that his salivary gland cancer had metastasized, Keith was able to participate in a clinical trial testing the targeted therapy, larotrectinib, because the genetic testing of his tumor revealed this alteration, an NTRK fusion that matched him to the therapy. And happily, larotrectinib has been amazingly effective, and he is currently living life to the fullest. Next to Keith is Eva Joseph. Terry mentioned her in her remarks. I'll just say briefly that Eva and her husband Dwight moved to West Lynn, Oregon, after she retired from her position as Vice President and Manager of New Product Development at a California-based insurance company. She was diagnosed, as Terry mentioned, with stage 4 triple-negative breast cancer in 2014 and participated in a clinical trial testing the checkpoint inhibitor atezolizumab in combination with chemotherapy by Abraxane. And this combination treatment has kept her cancer controlled for the past 4 years, so she's able to enjoy her retirement with her husband Dwight. Last but not least, Tama Hargraves at the end of the table, who lives in Raleigh, North Carolina with her husband Bob of 43 years, is here with us. Tama is a 12-year survivor of lung cancer and chooses to give back to the cancer community through her volunteer work at UNC Lineberger Comprehensive Cancer Center. In this role, she provides newly diagnosed lung cancer patients with emotional and practical support. So we wanted to hear from each of you briefly in turn. We're going to start with Keith and work our way down, please.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your time to hear my story. I'm very honored and excited to be here to tell you a little bit about it. In 2014, I noticed a lump in my cheek about the size of a pea. I didn't think much about it. Went to see my doctor, and he decided to have it extracted and biopsied. And it turned out it was cancer, saliva gland cancer. And even though it was the C word, saliva gland cancer to me didn't sound that threatening, because I had lots of saliva glands, and you could just cut one out, right? If you get a tumor, you could just treat it that way. So, and that's exactly what they did. I was referred to a cancer surgeon who removed a margin of safety, some tissue, and then also ran me through radiation treatments for one side of my head and neck. And so the radiation treatments, I didn't think too much about it, but figured it was pretty powerful, because they made a lead guard for my teeth and my gums to protect them from the radiation, and also the mask, to keep my head in place during the treatments. But anyway, it was the same old thing. Whenever I would have surgery, I'd go back for a follow-up visit, and there were more tumors every time. So it was just one surgery after another, more tumors and more tumors. Ultimately, it spread to my lymph glands and started coming down my neck and in my chest. And the last surgery that I had was a really pretty major surgery across here, where they removed a whole lot of lymph nodes and some muscle. And so I went back for a follow-up visit, and I said, "Guess what, doctor? I noticed some more tumors over here." And he said, "Keith, I can't keep up with this. We're going to have to go a different direction. Surgery can't effectively treat your cancer." So he ordered a whole battery of tests, scans, and all kinds of things. And as it turns out, the cancer had metastasized and spread to my lungs and my liver and my kidneys. So that little saliva gland cancer became something really pretty threatening. Anyway, he referred me to a chemotherapist, and my very first meeting with her, she said, "If you're willing to take chemotherapy, it's going to make you very sick, but I can buy you 3 or 4 more weeks." And that was the first time I realized that I was going to die, and not just die, but die pretty quickly. And so, but at that same meeting, she had mentioned that she had been getting these emails. She was e-blasted by an administrator for a clinical trial for a new drug who was looking for patients that had NTRK fusion. And she had noticed, reviewing my medical record, that there was one pathology report that said I was positive for NTRK3 genomic fusion. Now, I didn't know what that meant, but to me, it was a glimmer of hope. I went back to my apartment. I was in Houston at the time for cancer treatments, and went back to my apartment, and I was kind of grappling with this news of impending death that was brand new to me. And about 3 or 4 hours later, I get a phone call from that clinical trial administrator who had been e-blasting all the doctors at MD Anderson. And she offered me the opportunity to participate in the clinical trial. So the day I was supposed to start chemotherapy, I chose not to, because that was the same day I started the clinical trial for larotrectinib. I was the number 6 patient to use this drug. And the clinical trial administrator was so positive and so optimistic about what this drug could do that kind of bled over to me, and I was also. But the thing that was amazing to me, the tests had revealed that the tumors were too many to count throughout my body, and that in just 5 days before I started the clinical trial, that the tumors had more than doubled in size and in numbers. So it was growing really, really fast. And I could feel the tumors in my face and neck. And after 4 days, when I went like this, I couldn't feel the tumors anymore. They were gone. So I knew pretty quickly that this was going to be an effective treatment. But then when they did their first scans at the end of the 4 weeks, my doctor told me that there were no tumors. They were all gone, except one. Yes, thank you. There's except one tumor that was left in my lungs, which had shrunk by 65%. And it was so small that it didn't affect my quality of life. So we just left it there to kind of see how the treatment would continue with it, and it continued to shrink. Now, I'm still in the clinical trial. That's been 2.5 years, and I have not had one single new tumor since I've been on this drug. Wow. It's amazing. Now, the cancer research it's saved my life, of course, but I'm only one, and I think Dr. Mardis said it's like 16.9 million survivors. Can you imagine my happiness times 16.9 million? The Earth ought to spin off of its axis from that. But anyway, it's just really tremendous. I was told that the test, the pathology report, that test was not even developed until 2013. So cancer research is really, really right now, you know. And another thing, too, I have been having treatment for the surgery, which is to remove tissue, you know, and radiation, which is to kill tissue. And I was getting ready to start chemotherapy, which was to kill tissue. But this drug, larotrectinib, doesn't kill tissue. It stops the tumor from ever happening in the first place. So I can't tell you how good I feel. I have not missed a day's work since I've started this drug. All my vital signs are better than they've ever been. I may even get off my blood pressure medication. So anyway, I just, that's my story, and I just wanted to share that with you. Thank you very much for being here, and thanks for giving me my few minutes to tell you my story.
Perfect. That's fine. So Eva's now going to relate her story for us.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm really glad to be here to tell you my story. I am 72 and currently retired. However, before I retired, as Dr. Maris said, I was Vice President Manager of New Product Development for a California-based insurance company. In 2014, we decided after we retired, my husband and I, that we would move to Oregon because we wanted to get to know that part of the country. We wanted to take little day trips or maybe overnight trips. And then, before we could make any trips at all, I was diagnosed with cancer. I have been diagnosed twice with cancer. The first cancer was found in 2002 with a mammogram. I became concerned that something was not right when I was asked to have an ultrasound subsequent to my mammogram. The ultrasound showed that something was on my left breast, spots were on my left breast, and following a biopsy, I was told that I had a very aggressive form of breast cancer. Surgery later supported our suspicions that the breast cancer had started to spread to my lymph nodes, and the sentinel node was removed. My diagnosis after tests and 2 surgeries was stage 3 breast cancer. My feelings at that time were in disarray. However, the overarching feeling was that of fear. I did not know if the prescribed treatment, the use of chemotherapy and radiation would be enough to cure me. Throughout the year-long treatment, I experienced side effects from the treatment: vomiting, nausea, and extraordinary fatigue. And because steroids were used, I gained weight and developed a moon face. I was truly, oh, and don't let me forget, I lost all my hair, which was truly traumatic. I was embarrassed to go outside, but staying inside was not an option for many reasons, not least of which I had a daughter to graduate from high school and to see off to college. I was cancer-free for over 10 years following that treatment that started in 2002. The second diagnosis that I received was in 2015, after we had moved to Oregon from California. In 2015, I started to have difficulty breathing. At first, I thought the shortness of breath was attributed to my asthma. I have asthma. You could probably hear it now. And finally, after not being able to climb stairs or walk across a parking lot, I went to my personal physician. And when they took the x-rays that she recommended, they found a tremendous amount of fluid in my left lung. I did not have a breast at this point because I had had a mastectomy in 2002. But the cancer came back, not in that breast, it came back in my lungs, in my sternum, in my bones. And we know it was still breast cancer because there's a breast cancer cell that we could track. After all of the treatment and a lot of the information that they gathered through blood and other methods, I was told that I had stage 4 breast cancer and triple negative responders, a very aggressive form of cancer. I personally had never known of anyone who lived through stage 4 cancer. I was certain this was a death sentence, not down the road in years, which we all know is going to happen one day, but immediately, like in a matter of weeks or a month. But the oncologist that I was working with at the time said that I had other options. I felt that at that time, she suggested that I enroll in a clinical trial that they had just started. And I was really happy to do that because what other options were available? And with the trial, you stand a chance, a good chance, if it's a good trial. The treatment, despite losing my hair and feeling extremely tired, after several treatments, I began to feel stronger, and the scan showed the tumors were shrinking. This was my clue that I was on the real treatment and not a placebo. Considering that people with stage 4 diagnosis were expected to live 18 months. I'm still here after 4 years. I do have some side effects because I am on the combination of immunotherapy and chemotherapy. The chemotherapy part is Abraxane. I can't pronounce the name of the immunotherapy. After treatment in 2002, I developed, 2012, I developed lymphedema. Lymphedema is a disease, or I don't know what you call it. It's not
Condition.
a condition. Thank you. I knew that was a better word. Lymphedema is a condition that you get when your lymphatic system is not working properly. Unlike the circulatory system, the lymphatic system is not closed. It's expected that the purpose of your lymph nodes is to gather the dead cells, the things that the body is throwing off, out of your body. So something happened, and I still don't know what happened, because I didn't develop lymphedema until after I started immunotherapy, and it's definitely not the result of the immunotherapy. But let's see, last December, I started getting swelling in my arm, and I was flying because we had gone to San Francisco. And I got worried about flying, going back to Oregon. So as soon as we got back to Oregon, I went to immediate care. They said, this is lymphedema, this is what you need to do. And then I got the treatment for it. I feel so fortunate to have had the opportunity to receive immunotherapy. I don't think I would be here today without it. I want people to know that this immunotherapy is providing hope for people like me and others who thought they had no chance at life, and that it only came about because of cancer research and the hard work and money that supported it. Thank you.
Okay, I'll get to finish this up.
All right.
And I will apologize in advance because I sound like a frog, and I may be swigging water every now and then. You're lucky because I had no voice 2 days ago, so, or maybe you're not lucky. All right. In November of 2006, I was diagnosed with stage 3B non-small cell lung cancer adenocarcinoma. I had absolutely no symptoms when I was diagnosed, except for a small bump above my left clavicle. I was thankful for a very proactive primary care physician who said, "Oh, I don't think it's anything important, but let's biopsy it." When the results came back, he couldn't believe the pathology report. He said I was too healthy. And he ordered a comprehensive CT scan, and that confirmed the diagnosis of my lung cancer with a tumor in my upper right lobe and numerous cancerous lymph nodes in my chest. I was not a candidate for surgery. Because of where I live in Raleigh, I had two great comprehensive cancer centers within 45 minutes of my house. My son, who you might have remembered, he was the bald guy in the picture with me, is an emergency medicine physician in Atlanta, and encouraged me to get to a teaching hospital where the cutting edge treatments are. So I was able to shop for my treatment. I knew what the statistics were for lung cancer. It's the #1 cancer killer. So I chose the Cancer Center at the University of North Carolina because I could participate in the clinical trial comprising of an aggressive 9-month treatment. I was bluntly told that if we were going to get the cancer, this clinical trial might be my only chance. The plan included chemo, higher dose radiation, and a new targeted therapy called Tarceva. I remember asking the oncologist if I should be afraid of this treatment, which could bring me to my knees. And his reply, I'll never forget, was, "You need to fear the tumor, not the trial." The treatment was rough. I tolerated the chemo pretty well. I did lose my hair, but it came back in a beautiful gray. But the radiation was very, very rough on me, and I was not able to eat for about 3 weeks. Tarceva side effects are also quite interesting. I had a rash that was like being a 14-year-old teenager with acne again, and I had some major GI issues. One of the first things I did when my 9-month treatment was over was to go to a spa and get my body entirely exfoliated. It really felt good. One of the really good things about participating in a clinical trial is that they're always keeping their eye on you. They're always checking on you and they'll follow you closely for a long time. 3 years after my treatment was ended, it was discovered that my cancer had also returned, but ironically only in my neck region where it had never been radiated. However, I did have one metastases to my brain by then. Thankfully, more chemo, radiation, and a CyberKnife treatment, which is a robotic pinpoint treatment, radiosurgery addressed that cancer, and since then I have been treatment-free. I do live with side effects. My lungs are compromised, and I have a radiation cough, and I can get pneumonia fairly easily, so I have to pay attention to what my body is saying to me. The reason I chose to participate in that clinical trial was that I knew the odds of surviving lung cancer were not in my favor. But I also believe that if I could help researchers and oncologists make a difference for others, even if it wasn't successful for me, that I would do it. Years later, I learned about biomarkers and decided to participate in molecular testing to learn if I had a genetic makeup for my cancer. It turned out I had the EGFR mutation, and fortunately, Tarceva was one of the first targeted drugs to treat that mutation. So I was lucky. I feel extremely lucky to have participated in that clinical trial that specifically targeted that mutation. And now I know for sure that it was my participation in a clinical trial that saved my life. In 2014, I retired after 42 years of being an educational speech pathologist, which makes me a real hero. Now, nearly 13 years as a lung cancer survivor, my trajectory has changed from being a patient to an advocate. I'm part of several lung cancer support groups, including the Lung Cancer Initiative of North Carolina. I speak to first-year med students about what it's like to get bad news. And I have advocated for lung cancer research funding both in my state and nationally. I'm on the Patient and Family Advisory Council at UNC's Cancer Hospital. But the volunteer position I love and cherish the most is serving as a patient lay navigator at the Cancer Hospital at UNC. I team with nurse navigators, my own oncologists, to provide non-medical and emotional support to lung cancer and head and neck patients. While it's not about me, many patients seem to find hope when they find out that I have survived this long as a lung cancer patient. All of these activities are my way to give back, especially to the hospital, doctors, and medical personnel who saved my life. I never use the word cured. I never use the word cancer-free. I use the word controlled, even though I haven't had symptoms for years. And I like that term the best because it gives me a little bit of control over myself. I'm here today because of the research and clinical trials being done for lung cancer. The identified lung cancer mutations, targeted therapy drugs, including immunotherapy, have exploded since I was diagnosed 12 years ago. I didn't have any of those options back then. I'm so thankful for the research funding and treatment that allow me to share my story with you as a survivor. I surely hope funding and clinical trials continue to grow for all cancers so we can meet more long-term survivors in our journey. Thanks for letting me share my story.
So I just want to finish up by emphasizing what you've heard here in the context of cancer clinical trials. The statistics tell us that only about 3% of adults actually go on to a cancer clinical trial after a cancer diagnosis, and this is a disappointingly small number. It's really important to have advocacy, it's important to have knowledgeable oncologists, and it's important to have hospital systems that actually can offer out these trials, especially in the community setting where most of our cancer patients actually get their care. So I think what you've heard here is a powerful combination of success stories, all tied to clinical trials. We'd love to see more of that happening, and with the increasing number of drugs that are available on clinical trials, I think this is a fantastic opportunity to bring patients in, build those numbers, and generate the evidence that the FDA needs to evaluate those therapies for approval. So it's really fantastic to hear all of your stories. We're so pleased that you're part of our AACR Cancer Progress Report for 2019. And we just really want to thank everybody who's participated, included those of you in the audience with your stories. And thank you all for your interest in our work and continued success for cancer research moving forward. Thanks everyone for being here.